we are going to jump in. Okay, so I want to give you a couple updates. First and foremost, hi, I'm Stefan Peruse. I think I know everyone here. I go by he, him, and I am the high school simulation manager for Statecraft. I do a lot of the behind the scenes work to support y'all, your students, and any prospective teachers, admin, et cetera, et cetera. I've been working with Scott Pangrazzi here for a little over 2 years, maybe. And I'll give him his due intro in a little bit, but I want to give you some updates as to what's been going on behind the scenes with Statecraft this summer. We focused a lot on safety this summer. This was a lot about making sure that the security for students behind the scenes is just everything is patched up in a way that there can't be anything going on in there. So that was our number one focus this summer. I do also want to say that we do have a back to school discount happening this week only. So if you haven't seen that in your email, please inquire about it. I will check in with you later. If you do have any questions, feel free to message me about that. This is the first of about 6 workshops that we're going to be doing. And so if you do want to come back to any of them, happily invite you back to those. We'll be going deeper into a few more of these sections to help you out. And if you get to see a familiar face, then it's actually going to be really cool for you to then message them on the side, be like, hey, this is crazy what's happening in my simulation. Is this happening in yours? How are you dealing with that? So really building a community out of this for you to rely on other teachers is kind of a side goal of this. We do have a Reddit thread that we have just started so that you have that opportunity to post on there. We'll go over that at the end. But know that there will be future ones. And at the end of those, we will be doing 2 simulations for only instructors. So we'll do a US government and an international relations simulation in the spring. So your students can play it this year, you can play it this year, kind of understand both sides of it. When you registered, it asks what questions might you have? And so we're going to hopefully get to answer all those. Some of those questions are how to incorporate the resources into your lesson plans, getting started assignments, keeping student engagement, how to set up and implement the sim, how to use an AP government classes, and then how to begin the game in the class and what early problems may occur. If you do have other questions throughout this presentation, this workshop, throw them in the chat, raise your hand, do something, wave your hands. I don't, like, let's make sure that you are getting your questions answered. That's why you're here. Expectations of today's workshop. We want to make sure that you get to understand how to create that world if you don't know how already, and how students get into it. That is the first barrier in making sure that we can implement it. Then we will move through that sim. How do you start it, right? Like, is it period 0? Like, you just let it happen, or what things could you do to help make it easier for students to understand? As those periods go, what do you do as the instructor? How does that work? We'll talk about basic grading and how you can incorporate it into your class. And then at the end, we'll save some time to do some questions, and we'll have a little review survey so that we can help better plan those next workshops throughout the fall. With that being said, I have a couple things here. I'm gonna walk through signing up for a sim, but I wanted to broach the elephant in the room. ChatGPT is here already. It's not coming halfway through the year. We aren't caught off guard, but I have heard from a lot of teachers that it's here and we're a little worried. I'm sure a lot of you have plans about this, but I just want to reassure you, Statecraft cannot be seen by ChatGPT. Students can't use ChatGPT. This is a real ironclad way to make sure that students are critically thinking, and not just that, like having fun doing it too. So that will come up through what Scott's going to be talking about in his side of things. And with that, I'm going to show you how to set your world, and then I'm going to do my intro with Scott, and then he will dive in and I will be quiet. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Give me a thumbs up if you can. Awesome. Cool. All right, so this is mine. This is my like instructor dashboard. I have my testing one that I show y'all sometimes. On this far left side, it says new sim course. If you haven't created a sim, this is where you're going to do it. I recommend doing a simulation per class, mainly because those students are all together in the same place. We've had overlaps, you can do that, but this is a really great way to make sure that the communication in the classroom stays in one place. You can allow for Zoom sessions outside of class or in class. It's up to you. It'll take it off if you say no. I'm going to keep you here for now. We are testing a new one that's coming up soon. And so to the US government side, that one will be a little bit more team focused. And the hope is that Dr. Keller, who's created all these sims, will be ready to release it in spring. That's the government beta one. So don't click on that one yet. Click on the US. That's where we're focused right now. Course name, whether it be AP Gov or civics or something else, do whatever works best for you. This is just helping students identify your class. So course code AP Gov 101. That's a lot of time, like it's up to you. You really don't have to do something very specific there. This is the part that is specific. This is what you're going to give your students in the syllabus, the simulation code. So the sim code could be anything from falling apples, fall 2023 to your last name 2023. I always recommend to put a date in there, specifically if you plan on using it in multiple semesters and over multiple years. So we could do something like Statecraft fall 2023. So they need to copy that exactly the way that it looks with those characters capitalized and not capitalized. And I'll show you where that goes in a second. So next, I'm going to have the start date as September 6th on a Tuesday, which means that all students need to sign up before September 6th. That is imperative. All right. So that gives you like a few weeks. Always start that process earlier. Plus, they get in their head, they're like, I'm excited about this. It's coming up. Always get that process started earlier. Plus, you're going to have those students who are like absent or sick or something on a vacation or whatever. So get that going. Let's do Central Time. Obviously, this is whatever time zone that you're in. And then this kind of gives me a lay of the land of how the periods look. So starting on September 6th here, moving through all September, there are 4 periods plus that tutorial period 0. I can change them by dragging that backside, and I can click and change the times to have exact times. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. What we've seen is what works best or most consistently the first time you use the US Gov Sim. 1 week per period is great. I know Scott uses that, and he's also used 8 weeks. So he'll get into a little bit more of how he's done that. But you can kind of see that overlay. You can always snap a picture of this and put it in the syllabus to help with that process too of students visually. I'm a visual learner, so that always helps me. Then you get to that payment. If you are a school that the students are going to be paying, you click here and you put in the number of students. That caps the number of students. So if you think that there might be a couple extra students jumping into your class, it might be worth saying instead of 25, we're going to have 30, right? If your school is paying for it, the professor payment, that would be the one that you'd click. And you can put a little higher number for that one. And that's where I work with you and your admin, and we get that all sorted out. I think many of you have already done that process, so that's good. Once we create the course, it'll come up and then all the payment will be there. Now, on the dashboard, it'll be sitting here, AP Gov. That specific SIM code will go into, I'll show you where it goes. If I log into the student side, nope, that's going to give me, here we go. The student account under usstatecraftsim.com. I'm going to click this not registered yet button here at the bottom under login, and then I'm going to paste that code. What that's going to do is it's going to pull up my specific course. They'll put their first name, their last name, their email, and they'll put a password. Once they do that, they get to choose how extroverted they want to be, how much responsibility they want to have, and 5 roles. The simulation takes all those students' decisions into consideration and then spits out those roles. Any questions on that? I know that was a quick run through, but we recorded it, so it's all here for you. Cool.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go for it, Robin.
If we are paying like per teacher, how does that end up working?
That's something I'll work with you on, and that makes it a little easier for you. So like anytime you do sign up, just send me an email, and it's like, you have unlimited with the teacher license, and I'll just make sure that it gets activated for you. That's a great question. Thank you. Anything else? Awesome. All right, well, let me introduce Scott here. Scott has been using Statecraft for a little over 2 years now, has used it in 12 classes, also did 2 years of discovery research, about 2 years on Statecraft, did a lot of reading, tried to work through it, played it with his colleagues, and then has been like really creative with it. And one thing I want you to, a lens I want you to have when Scott's talking is Scott is a high context teacher. He really wants to make sure that his students have all of the resources at their disposal to make the best decisions possible so that they can understand why they're making those decisions. And I think that that has been a major reason as to why he's been successful in at least his classroom with this sim. There's a lot of other teachers who are not high context and just let it run. And that's totally cool too. But that's just a little context about how Scott's been using it. He's up in Detroit, and I think I'm gonna stop talking now. So Scott, thanks so much for being here. We're excited to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Do you want to maybe make me like a co-presenter, and that way I can just click on the links? Because there's one thing I do want to show everybody, that it's behind kind of our school security, and I can pull it up, but it won't be something that you would be able to access. So I just noticed that when I was preparing for this. So if you want to make me a co-presenter, then I can kind of run through the different things I want to show them.
So you should have access to sharing screen now.
Great, perfect. So yeah, my name is Scott Pangrazzi. I am about to start my 13th year teaching at University Liggett School, which is in Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan. So we border the city of Detroit. We are a pretty small independent school. As Stefan mentioned, I've run the simulation in 12 different classes over 2 years, with a range of participants from 10 to 18 per class. So we do have relatively small class sizes. And I really did like that introduction that Stefan gave, because what I'm about to show you is kind of the way that I have done it. It is certainly not the only way to use it. Yeah, I'm going into my 3rd year, but I'm really interested in being a part of this, because I want to know what you all do with it, and how I might improve my class. The way I always kind of talk to other people that may be interested in it but might be a little bit hesitant. When Stefan interviewed me for a case study last year, I talked about this. I am not a gamer at heart. We play euchre up here in Michigan, and I love that card game. We'll play cribbage, but I didn't play video games much as a kid. They're bringing it back, but they discontinued NCAA football many years ago, and that was probably the when I retired from holding a controller. Strategy games, things like that, not necessarily things that I would I would gravitate towards. I'm also someone who can get pretty content with what I'm doing and not want to change it. And so doing this, in particular with Stefan, who's been a great support person all the way through, it's forced me to challenge myself a little bit. It's forced me to do something a little bit different than I would normally try, and not be necessarily a gamer or someone who's going to sit down and spend my free time doing that. It's really gotten me a little bit out of my comfort zone in the classroom, which I think is something I needed where I'm at currently. Being in my 13th year, finding new ways to do things keeps you engaged. And this has certainly helped me do that. So again, I just kind of a little bit of where I'm coming from in this process. This will be my 3rd full year teaching civics. We reintroduced civics as a core class for the 10th grade about 2 years ago at my school. And before that, I did teach government electives for 11th and 12th graders. So I taught a standard government course. I've taught classes on electoral process almost every year. It's election day here in Michigan. So if it's election day in your state, hopefully get on vote. Very easy this time around. We only had one ballot measure on, no other actual election. So it was in and out of my city hall to take care of that. And then I've also taught various different classes in different social studies subjects. So we really wanted to find something that would get the students to engage with each other, put the things that they learn in a civics class into practice. And so kind of from the beginning, when we were thinking about this class, we were like, how can we do this? How can we find a real world application? And so we really did, as a school, look into Statecraft a lot, but before we kind of moved it into the classroom. So again, just, I know everyone's kind of coming from a different place, from where they start or how they're going to use it. And hopefully this is a way to help you just think about how you use it in your class in a little bit of a different way. So let's see here. Okay. If I can get a thumbs up, can everyone kind of see the the screen and everything like that? Thank you. So yeah, getting started. One of the things that I use really in all my classes, but specifically for civics, is just a main Google site. And so kind of under general information here is where I would have my syllabus posted. And I know that's kind of a big thing, like when you're introducing something like a simulation into the curriculum, and something that might cost the students money depending on your school. And so, one thing that I do very straightforward is right at the top here. I just kind of include it in my course resources, and I provide a link to Statecraft simulations, and that exists on my Google site kind of throughout the course. Now, this is something that students and parents can access. It's something I go over and the first day of class. But we also have a back to school presentation for parents each year. And so one thing that I do is I'll also kind of throw it up on the screen and talk about the different resources that we use, and talk about Statecraft simulations, and mention that there's going to be a cost that's going to go on the student accounts. We always do the simulation towards the end of the semester. I'll talk about that a little bit later as I go through some of the resources. And so you're thinking, okay, you covered it in class, you brought it up at parents' night. The retention of that information, or the amount of people are there, maybe that hits, like, if depending on your school community, 20 to 50% who might be aware of it. So one last thing I always do, just to kind of make sure my bases are covered, is I will send out an email communication a few weeks before the parents get charged, that basically outlines why we're using it. Again, another link to Statecraft for them to look at what the cost is going to be. And so far, putting it in my syllabus, talking about in class, bringing up at parent night, sending out this email that, hey, student accounts are going to get charged, that has pretty much led to universal acceptance. Nobody's said, hey, why are you doing this, or what's the value of this, or pushback on the cost at all. And that is a relatively rare occurrence, I would say, in these days when you introduce things in schools. There's much more pushback than we probably dealt with recently. And so I've had some good results in having parents respond productively. In fact, that's what I tend to get is positive, like, oh, wow, this is cool, or wow, really interesting, or I can't wait to see what role my student gets, or things like that. So is it maybe, does it seem like a lot, maybe 4 or 5 different times that you have to kind of reach out or set aside time to talk about it? It could, but I do think it helps build the buy-in early on, and gets the students excited about it. And one of the things that has happened now, heading into what will be my 5th semester doing it in my 3rd year, is that students from other classes, they hear about it and they want to know more about it. So it's starting to kind of catch on the more and more I do it. And I certainly don't get much pushback from the parents or administrators, even though there's an additional cost. So when to start? And again, there's that little bit of word of mouth coming from students in previous years, mostly positive. Some students, depending on the role they get, but some students come in with a little bit of knowledge saying, oh yeah, I know we're going to do this. Tell me more about it. So I try to do it really early in the year. And generally speaking, we'll play the simulation. We'll set aside 5 weeks at the end of each semester for the simulation. Not every period is going to be a week. I know you'd think 4 periods in the simulation, 4 weeks, but it tends to be a little bit shorter for the periods at the beginning and a little bit longer towards the end. And I guess I should talk a little bit about how the classes are broken down. Again, this is a class that every 10th grade student has to take. Very rarely we'll get a student who comes in 11th grade who comes from a school that they have not had a civics or social studies course yet. And so sometimes we have a couple 11th graders, or sometimes we'll have a high achieving 9th grader that's scheduled. They're looking to add a class, and we may allow them to take that. That's happened once or twice, but mostly we're talking about the 10th grade class. We've done 5 sections per year, 3 in one semester, 2 in the other, and roughly somewhere between, like I said, 10 and 18 kids per class. I was just looking at my class rosters today, I think, and this will be the first year that I'm not the only civics teacher. But my classes are looking about 14 per class, which I think is a good number for the simulation, or close to a really good number. Breaks kill momentum. Yeah, that's something that Stefan and I talked about. I think the best way to talk about this topic is you're always going to continue to tinker with it. I think, I feel really good about where I am and how I incorporate the simulation. And yet I've made some changes that I thought at the time this is going to really help, and other times, no, it hasn't. And so what I mean by that is the way that we do our semesters. We're a semester school, and our first semester wraps up it's usually we start our finals week the second to last Monday in January. And so there's that question of what do you do with winter break, right? When you want this to be the culminating kind of unit in your class and part of the culminating assessment. And so the first year, I really wanted it to be continuous. And so I actually had it not be the culminating assessment. I had it a little bit earlier in the semester. I had it basically right after we came back from Thanksgiving break and ran it right through the start of winter break. And there's a little bit lost when it's not the culminating assessment. But at the same time, this year I flipped. I said, well, why don't we just take, because again, as Stefan showed you, that it's very flexible how you can set up your periods. And so I had periods 0 through 2 run up into the 2 weeks leading up into winter break. And then I used the last 2 weeks of class time when we came back from winter break for periods 3, 4, and then the assessment week for the debriefing presentation, which I'll show you a little bit later. And what happened? I saw there was a little bit lost. I thought things were going really well the first 2 weeks, and we came back after 16 days off, and there was just a lag in restarting. And so there's no perfect way to do it. I'm still kind of debating, just because I started later in the semester, when we're going to do it this year. But I have found that if you can do it continuously, and if you can set aside 4 or 5 weeks, or even if it's an 8-week, right? And that just depends on we all have pressures on the amount of class time. I'm looking at my block schedule. We do blocks. We meet almost every other day. One day, all the classes meet in the week. And so, I'm looking at 37 or 38 blocks for the entire semester, which is what our, what our semesters break down to. And, finding the right place for you, that's going to take a little bit of looking at the schedule. But I've really been thinking about if we can continuously play it or have it be at the forefront of what you're doing in class for a set amount of time, that it tends to work a little bit better. Obviously, second semester at the end of the year really fits well. I use the last 5 weeks. We start that first week in May. It runs through early June. I just see the buy-ins really fully there all the way through. Whereas if you stop in the middle for a little while, it takes a little bit to get them back going again and remember why they made the decisions that they did. So what should students know before they start playing? I can give you a quick rundown. Again, it's a basic civics course for all 10th grade students, not based off AP. We certainly use the state standards to guide our decisions and structuring the class, but as an independent school, we don't necessarily have to follow all of those or use them directly. And so, I kind of do a first unit, which is the Constitution. We take a look at each of the 7 articles. We take a look at the 27 amendments, really dive into the meaning and interpretation, and have debates about the Constitution and the amendments. Usually my second unit is a deeper exploration of the 3 branches of government, which is important for them to have as they head into the simulation, especially in terms of executive and legislative functions. And then for the third, I do a kind of a municipal state government unit. And then the fourth unit is the simulation. And so having them pretty prepared to understand what they're going to be confronted with, Fourth, Fifth Amendment, there's First Amendment issues, Eighth Amendment issues that pop up. There's a 10th Amendment issue that's directly addressed in the simulation. Obviously, understanding separation powers, looking at checks and balances, relationship between executive and legislative. These are all things that you're probably already doing throughout the course of the year that you can then say, oh, hey, remember when we talked about that? Or do you remember when we debated, these aspects of the amendments? And it's kind of a recall moment as you're going through the simulation. So in terms of activities to kind of get it started, I can show you one thing I do really quickly. That is, I say, it's basically, what is this role and what does it do? As students come in and they figure out what their role is and what's assigned, they kind of go into this presentation, and basically I have it broken down by roles, and I guess I can probably show it as a slideshow so it shows up a little bit better. I tell them, all right, take 3 minutes and brainstorm. What do you think this particular job does? And they just sit there without using any resources, just kind of jot some stuff down. And then I say, okay, take 5 minutes and look to see what this job actually does, using the class resources that are provided, going out and finding credible sources on the internet. And then what this serves as they start to get in the simulation is, okay, well, I'm being asked to gather some information, get a briefing from the President of the United States. And I know I'm using probably the most basic example that most of the students would have, what you would think to be the most prior knowledge of going in, but they can go in this presentation and see, oh, okay, this is what the student who's playing the role thought about this as they were assigned that role. Or if they're asked to, gather intelligence from CIA director, things like that, maybe they don't have a great understanding of that particular role. And so this just kind of exists throughout, depending on what roles are particularly assigned to each student. And as you'll see, I mean, there's more roles in here than students were assigned. And so sometimes they're left a little bit blank, or that's not a playable role in the simulation that you're assigned. And you could talk about that with them as well, and who might have those responsibilities then if someone else is not playing a particular role in the game. But I found the big ones are the president of the ACLU and then the media roles, right? These are things that aren't necessarily directly always going to be in our curriculum in the same way that legislative roles are or executive roles. And so getting students to think about those positions is something that I found is helpful just to do right at the beginning. I know that, and this is something I don't personally use, but this is something that exists on the Statecraft website, that they have resources for starting the simulation and things like that. So there's a lot of resources that Statecraft does provide that could be helpful as well. And then for period 0, again, going back to what is your role and what does it do, Stefan kind of walked you through how the students get assigned that role by filling out that survey. And then when they come into class the first day and it's revealed, I have them do that what is a role and what does it do activity. And then I actually do a pretty thorough walkthrough of all the options that exist to them. Exist for them, I should say, on kind of the dashboard. And so let's go over to Statecraft really quickly here. Beat it just before. Oh, no, logged out, of course. This happens to me all the time in the classroom. We'll start talking about something, and next thing I know, I'm no longer logged in. So let's get in. All right. One thing I do want to show you that I forgot to mention earlier, that if you're looking and wondering, how do I build a syllabus taking the simulation and make it a key part of my course, and showcase it in the syllabus, whether it's something you have to justify to a department chair or an administrator. I don't personally use this, but I do know that under documents, if you haven't taken a look, there's a lot of resources here for also helping you get this started or figure out how you want to use it in the class. And one thing I've noticed is that there is a sample syllabus here that you can kind of use to help structure your course if necessary. So one of the things I'll do with the students, and I'll go back to my dashboard here. And so we set up kind of just a sample starting point, is that if you can let the students loose in the game, and that's great. There's a lot that can be said about learning to do things that way. If you're someone who's crunched for time, like I am, just based on the amount of curriculum minutes that I have, I find it's helpful to kind of walk them through all of their options. And so I'll start with, and to me, the messaging center is key. This is going to be a place where every action that the students do, or every action that is related to that particular role, will end up, including the period briefings. And so I'll walk them through using the messaging center, showing them where to find the specific period briefings and what that might mean for them over the course of the next 2 or 3 class periods. Taking them over actions, which I wonder here if I click on let's log in and just be this virtual times editor really quick. I'll show them the actions and I'll pull up one, because in period 0, we always tell the students, there's things you really want to hold close. You don't want to give your best friend in the class, all the information or share everything with them like you might normally do, because they might be at separate purposes than you in the simulation. And so I'll walk them through and we'll talk about the position goals. I'll show them the different abilities that they can do. In period 0, there's a little, there's a way to get kind of some free SP. You can perform some simple actions. There's some quiz questions that get you some extra points, and get you to think about the functionality in the game. And so I'll walk them through kind of, the different possibilities that an individual role might have. I definitely show them the help, which is going to look a little bit different for the students than what my page might show you. But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot in here. Like if there's a student who really struggling with the concept and they just need help with SP and XP, there's a really good explanation right here within the help system. And a lot of times the students kind of overlook this part of it. This is something I learned in my 4th semester doing it, that you can actually, it'll show you how to vote. It actually help you if you're a student who's going to be 18 years old. Like, well, how do I vote? There's a link that takes you there to walk through the process of, okay, where do you register? Where's your polling location? Things like that I thought, I hadn't even necessarily looked into yet. Passing a bill. How do you pass a bill in the game? This is a great conversation that sometimes comes up. How is it different in the simulation versus what happens, when Congress passes a bill? But there's even graphics in there that show you how a bill passes in the simulation, which is key, right? Because sometimes the students, again, you're simulating what really goes on, but it's a slightly different process. And getting the students to discuss and debate the pros and cons of that is a conversation that I've always found to be valuable in the class. So just kind of a quick walkthrough. We'll probably I'll give the kids 20 minutes I'll spend probably 20 minutes explaining all the functions of the basically the dashboard. And then I'll give them another 15 to 20 minutes to respond to these questions in period 0. And that's really kind of, even if you want to take a lot of time on period 0, you can do it in one class period. And so you can kind of do a quick introduction and then get into the simulation. Speaking of which, period flow, really, again, you could kind of go with the route of, hey, it's all the information's there. It's a big puzzle. You got to figure it out. And then you got to make choices, which will then impact you for the rest of the period, or I should say next period and throughout the rest of the simulation. Or, if you're someone like me who uses this as an entire unit, I have a specific flow that I kind of use. It's not the same every period, but more or less, specifically for periods 1 through 3, I begin every period by I'll get the general briefings, and I will print them out. And so the president gets their own briefing. The military and intelligence community gets its own briefing, Congress, and then media and ACLU. And all I really do is I go through and I look at words that maybe perhaps the students might not know, or they might need greater clarification on. And so I give them 5 minutes and I say, okay, read your briefing. And I want you to make sure you understand every highlighted word in your briefing. Also, if there is a word that isn't highlighted, circle it, underline it, highlight it yourself. Let's talk about it. And then we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes longer, going through some of these things, depending on, each class. I had a class once that one group, it went for 30 minutes and the other group, it went for 5. And okay, then you got to kind of realign yourself and figure out how you're going to get both classes back on track. But a lot of good questions can come out of these briefings and connections to real world events that have happened. So I'll do this for periods 1 through 3. And then period 4, I say, okay, your period briefing, it's in your messaging center. You go ahead. If you have questions, you let me know. And so we'll take some time to really go over the period briefing to make sure we understand what you're expected to do during this particular period. And then during that time, because there's always a student that you give them 5 minutes, they say, well, I'm done in 1. Well, for each periods 1 through 3, I provide supplemental resources. And they'll change somewhat throughout the year. But generally speaking, I look at like, okay, what seems to be the major topics. So Fourth Amendment comes up. I give a link to the National Constitution Center, which has articles of interpretation of the Fourth Amendment there. This is a graphic from iCivics that talks about the structure of the House of Representatives and the Senate. For those students who are kind of getting their bearings in period one, like, okay, well, I'm the majority leader. What am I expected to do, right? ACLU for the president, give a history of the ACLU and a link to the website so that person can kind of look into the ACLU more specifically. And this is something that I kind of pulled from a teacher. He teaches nonfiction, but he's also a journalist. He's been published in different organizations, and this is something that he uses with his class. It's actually, he goes over the text elements of journalism, but they have an online version that we talk about, okay, what is a journalist's obligation, right? So for those people that are assigned the media. And so this is a kind of a condensed version of that text that teacher uses in their particular class. So I try to find something for each of the groups for them to look at each period. And so they can go to our Google site and kind of look through that if they're pushing ahead of some other people in the class. And then the next thing that we do, and I pass this out physically to everybody, but they have if someone wants to type it, I'm okay with that too. I call this the XP tracker, and this is where I'm going to put in a plug for Stefan here. This came out of, he actually zooms into my classes, which, you know, being in Michigan, that first class starts at 8:40. So he's out on the West Coast getting up at, I don't know what time, and getting ready to go. And you would never guess that it's 5:30 in the morning there. He's so engaged with the students, has a ton of energy, and it really does get the kids excited about the simulation after talking to them. But he really puts them through the paces of, well, why did you do that decision? Or what does this mean to you in the game? And the first semester, I kind of let them go. And I said, okay, you know, we went through the period briefing. We did that walkthrough, showed you some supplementary resources, start making decisions. And it was a little chaotic. And I always have Stefan come in after period one before we start period two. And he kind of, you know, he spends about a half hour with each class. And kind of calls on different students and asks them, well, why did you do this? And out of that, I was like, oh, we need to be a little bit more deliberate in our decision making. And the students said that as well. So one thing I came up with, I call it the XP inventory, and I have them do it in periods 1, 2, and 3, is that they then log into the simulation. And when they click on something, and I'll show you here under their abilities, and let me see if I can. And then in period 0, there's a little bit less information, obviously, because it's a tutorial. But when you click on these options, you're clicking a button, and then it's giving you more information. And as the simulation goes along, that information becomes more dense. There's more things to process. And so what I have the students do is I have them go through and fill out as many options as they can. I usually give them like 30 minutes in class to plot out as many moves as they can. And I ask them to note the name of action and what the cost is in terms of XP, how it impacts your position goal. And that's always kind of the connection I make, is that you're not just doing actions to do actions. I mean, some students are, and you hope to reorient them. But the ones who really pick up on and really do well are the ones that realize, oh, these position goals, which I can't click on or do anything with, they're all related to different actions I can perform. And whether I perform the action in the way that makes the most sense to fill that position goal is how I might succeed in terms of a XP-SP model. And then my favorite, and I think the kids hate me for this, but cost and benefit. And I say not XP, I will mark them down. And this is, I only use this as a participation period. But if someone says, oh, it cost me 5 points in the game, I'm like, no, I want you to treat this as a real world. What is the cost if you make this decision? But what is the benefit? And the student who always wants to put in, as little effort as possible on this will say, well, I don't see that there's a cost for this, or I don't see that there's a benefit. In pushing the students to see, well, there is always a cost, and there may always be a benefit for your action. And to really get them to dive into that and spend some time. It's a good kind of reflecting on what they can do before they actually do it. And what do they think that result will be? This comes back as valuable when they're producing their final for this, which is a debriefing presentation explaining why they did the things that they did. For them to go back and say, oh yeah, in period 1, I thought this was a good move. And by period 3, I realized I was making mistakes and I found change as a result of that, or I changed my approach as a result of that. And so this is a document that I have students do for the first 3 periods. And here's a student example. And again, this is a very strong student, in my opinion. I weigh this very, very basically. I do total points. 2 out of 2 is full credit. You did everything I asked. 1 out of 2 is, well, maybe some things were left incomplete, but you turned it in on time. And then 0 out of 2 is you didn't do it. And so this is a strong student, and how much thought that they put in. I would have to zoom in on this for you to read the costs and the benefits. But this is how much thought this particular student put into this exercise. And I tell them they have to at least plot out 5 moves, and this student, I think, did 7. But you have the opportunity to do as many as you want. But again, as always with a time crunch, I think somewhere between 5 and 10 kind of shows to me that they've thought out some of their actions before they perform them in the simulation. And so then we play the sim, and we'll usually spend about 30 to 45 minutes in class just on that. And then they have till the next class period to make moves outside of simulation as well. And so that's kind of how I do the rundown there. Now, I know we talked about this. You're always concerned you're never going to have enough time, or you're not going to have enough content to talk for an hour. But as I see here, I'm running well behind. So we're going to be talking about grading at a later discussion. But I do want to show you some of the ways in which, because I don't personally use SP as a way to assess grade. You could. There's a way to do it. It's mentioned in the template syllabus online. I tend to use other assessments. And the way that I think about it as well, I've had students, and this is the anecdote I'll give you. There was a bill that passed, but the president vetoed it. And the majority whip in the House really wanted to pass and knew that they had to get it over or to 67% approval rating in Congress to override that veto. And this student, I saw them 5 times throughout the course of the day running back and forth in the hallways, literally running and exasperated that they could not get some people who she thought would help them get over that threshold and do certain things. One, because it was outside of class, so they weren't thinking about it as much as she was, or 2, their position goals weren't as strong as hers about getting this bill passed. And she was really frustrated. And she didn't succeed. She put in a ton of effort trying to. And so to me, there's other ways to show that effort. And in life, the way I kind of look at it is there are things that you can do everything right and still not necessarily succeed in your job. And you can do things wrong and still somehow succeed. And so I don't like to tie a grade to that specifically, but I try to do some other things for students to say, okay, well, maybe you accidentally clicked on the right button and you got some points in the game, or maybe you did everything you could, but you couldn't bring other people along with you and you were punished in the game via your SP. But the way I'm going to assess you is, how do you explain your choices, right? Can you put good justification behind them? So after period 1 and 2, I do something called a justification memo, and it's basically an internal document. They're encouraged to write it to other members of the different people that they're aligned with in the game, basically picking their most significant choice and explain why they're going to do it. So it's a little bit retroactive, right? Okay, here's a decision they made. It was the biggest one. And I asked them, what issue was presented to you today? And what did you end up doing? And what are the costs and benefits of this action? And they are supposed to write it to someone that has been involved in the decision-making process. And so I have a little brief rubric using our department standards for this particular class: connections to government, approaches to learning, research, communication. And that's kind of how I assess periods 1 and 2. Periods 3 and 4 actually came out of a student who was really frustrated in the sense that they wanted to introduce a bill in the game, but they didn't have that option. And so this is, well, what would you do if you really had to do this, basically? And so for periods 3 and 4, I asked them to think about something that they wish they could have done in the simulation, but the functionality didn't allow for it. Or to elaborate on something. For example, if you're in the media, you could publish a story, but you don't get to actually write the content of that story. So actually write a story based on that. And so I have templates in there for them to then write a brief story. I think I say 150 words. That's basically a news story. If you are in the executive branch, maybe you're putting out a White House press release. Maybe if you are the president, you want to hold a press conference or give an interview to a member of the media. So there's ways to pair up with other students in the class. You could give a Oval Office address if you'd like. Legislative branch, introduce a bill, give a floor speech, do a committee hearing with the ACLU or a member of the executive branch. Then campaign managers create a political ad, create a series of social media posts, come up with a print advertisement, or come up with merchandise. One of the most creative ways, and I can't show it because it has the student's face on it, but the campaign manager basically ran a campaign merchandise store to raise funds for the candidate and came up with campaign slogans related to the simulation and reference actions that the candidate actually did, and it kind of came up with their own kind of merch store for them. And so this one, again, the rubric is very similar, even though the final product is relatively different, but based on our same standards: connections to government, approaches to learning, research, and communication. So I think, the debriefing presentation. I think, Stefan, we're going to be sharing this with everyone. Most of the links are live. Most of the stuff is Google Docs, but there's the final product here that I do is based. This is an assignment that actually Statecraft did come up with. All these questions that the students have to pick to focus on are ones that Statecraft produced about different roles in the simulation. And then the students give a brief presentation explaining why they made the choices they made and whether or not they thought they were successful. So just to kind of give you a brief rundown of kind of the assignments I use in the class. I know I didn't get to basic grading incentivization so much, but we will cover that in a later session. So, well, Stefan, I think I went 5 minutes over what I was supposed to, so I apologize. But are there any questions I can answer? I saw that there were some questions going in the chat here. So I don't know, Stefan, if you want to facilitate or want me to just look through them.
Sure. Yeah. The one question that Ryan asked was about your teaching blocks. Is it, you said you had a 45-minute or at least all classes on one day and then block the rest of the week?
Yeah, so this is going to be new this year. In the past 2 years I've taught it, we have done every other day 75-minute blocks, 4 blocks in a day. And as you can imagine, in Michigan, the downside of that is when you have a snow day and it's the week in which you only have 2 blocks, you just now have 1 block over the course of the week with students. So what we're doing now is Monday, every class is going to meet for 40 minutes. And then Tuesday, Thursday is going to be the same blocks, Wednesday, Friday. We're all very excited about having Wednesday be Wednesday and not a random color day that we can't remember. So.
Thanks for answering that one. Any other questions for Scott at this point in time? I wanted to throw out there, because we didn't talk a lot about AP stuff, but we did bring up the page. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Is if you take into consideration what you heard about how Scott kind of went through and connected it back to the class. Can everybody see this page? Just making sure. So this is the AP US Gov page, and you can click on organized by standards or organized by simulation periods, and those bring up specific Excel docs of how those standards line up. And so if you can kind of take that into consideration and how you introduce them in your class, and of course it's going to take forever to load, we explain and we give you a match. This is 10 out of 10. This is matching up, or 8 out of 10, or 5 out of 10. And so that can help you start to understand, maybe I should introduce this specific assignment in terms of the powers allocated to Congress, the president, and courts demonstrate the separation of powers and checks and balances. Well, this is how we do it. It happens in all periods. So my recommendation would be take some of these brainstorming ideas that Scott has given you, and then like look through this and see how they connect for your class if you are AP US Gov. Granted, you could still probably use this for a regular AP or for a regular US Gov course as well, but that is there for your knowledge. And again, there's a second one that organizes it based on the periods. It's going to take forever to load, so I will let you peruse that. We will send this out as well, so don't worry about that. Making sure you have all that. How hard is it to run while continuing instruction? Would you like to answer that one, Scott?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, this is the culminating unit, and everything in that last 5 weeks of school is about the simulation. So everything, the prep work, you know, to get them prepared for that happens in the units before. Once I'm getting to the simulation, it is about the simulation. And obviously we're adding in supplemental resources or having debates about, you know, how do different individuals interpret the Fourth Amendment, what is protected by the Fourth Amendment, what's not, you know, that type of stuff is happening as we are doing the simulation. So yeah, it is what we're saying. You know, the school I teach at we don't do APs. We have a capstone culminating assessment. So I can't answer really any specific questions about how to use it for an AP class. That's kind of how I use it in the class, is that it's a full unit, and that's the focus.
I will say, to piggyback off of that, there have been two significant ways that I've heard of other AP US Gov teachers using it. One is after the AP as the culminating assessment for the debrief. So it depends where you go to school, because sometimes the AP is 2 weeks before the end of school, and sometimes it's 6 weeks before the end of school. And so depending upon that schedule, you could have that be the last thing. The other thing is a suggestion made from a professor that we work with, and she calls this the capstone, that doesn't run at the end, but it runs throughout the year. So you can use this as the point of which to refer back to as you're discussing. Okay, so we're talking about the 10th Amendment. How does this show up in the sim? And those could be some of those memos or justification memos that Scott was talking about. Robin, does that answer your question? Cool. Anything else coming up? The last thing here I just want to show you, I'm going to share my screen, is the Reddit channel. It has not been posted on because it was just, you know, created this past year, and we haven't really had a chance to like show it to teachers until now. And so excited about this. This is a great opportunity. The support team will be like kind of looking at it, but more of it will be about you. Support can only do so much in terms of classroom implementation. You are the experts of your classes. So use this to connect with each other, whether it be the US Gov Sim or the IR Sim. This would be where you post that information. And I realize it's for high school teachers. We probably have a couple middle school teachers jumping in here too. So just kind of wondering about, like, how do you get students to stay engaged, or what did you do the day one? I had an issue with this thing, you know. So I think one of the questions was, how, you know, what are some issues you could see happening day one? Well, if a student didn't sign up, that's a big issue. How do you get your students to sign up beforehand? Do you take time in class? Do you make it a homework assignment? So definitely a great spot to have that as your resource and as we move forward. With that being said, I am going to throw out a poll there. Please go ahead and fill this out. This again is going to help us determine how to structure these next workshops, and also what worked well and what didn't. This one, I'm going to stop the recording now.